On the morning of the war vote, the chamber of the long table smelled of stone polish and cold incense, and archivist Ullen Morrow arrived 2 hours early to make certain the statue was clean. It stood where it had stood for 40 years, 1 month and 9 days, on a black granite plinth at the chamber's north end, beneath the hanging banners of the 10 archons, facing the 406 seats of the Qirell Dominion's Grand Council. 3 meters of gray-green armor shaped around a human frame, helmet tucked under one arm the way the old human soldiers were said to carry them, the bare face beneath calm and closed-eyed and unmistakably dead, not decayed, preserved, sealed inside some ceramic miracle the species had poured over itself before it stopped mattering. The Dominion had recovered it from a derelict human frigate, the Palisade, found drifting cold and gutted on the far edge of Tarsus Reach. The salvage crews reported the ship airless, its crew gone, its logs wiped, and this one armored figure standing at parade rest on the ruined bridge as though no one had told it the fighting was over. The salvage master sold it at open auction for the price of a used cargo shuttle. The Ministry of Acquisitions cataloged it as Relic 44 Theta, classification biological, status inert, origin human. For 40 years the Dominion studied it. 1,914 published papers, 61 doctoral theses. Deep resonance imaging showed a complete body inside the armor, organs whole, tissues intact, blood still in its vessels, and no activity above the baseline of stone. In the 12th year, a Materials Institute was granted permission to take a sample and broke 3 industrial drill heads against the chest plating before the request was quietly withdrawn. In the 23rd year, a graduate student claimed her instruments had registered a single cardiac contraction, 1 beat, alone in 11 days of monitoring. Her committee attributed it to seismic interference from the tram line beneath the museum district. She left the field. The paper was never published. School children came on tours, 4,000 of them a year, and were told the same 3 things: that humans were a frontier species of limited numbers and sentimental habits, that they had signed the cessation accord at Tarsus Reach and then retreated to their 19 little colony worlds to farm, and that this relic, this dead soldier left standing on an abandoned ship, told you everything you needed to know about them. A species that abandons its dead, the docents said, holding up a lamp to the still gray face. Imagine how easily they abandon their living. Morrow had never liked that line. He had been junior staff when the relic arrived, and chief archivist for the last 19 years, and in that time he had dusted the armor's gauntlets more times than he had spoken to his own brothers. He knew the face the way one knows a portrait in a family hall. It did not look abandoned to him, it looked patient. He had never written that down anywhere, because there was no shelf in the Dominion's taxonomy for a patient corpse. Today the chamber did not belong to the schoolchildren. Today the 10 archons filed in beneath their banners, and behind them came the full council, 406 members in slate-colored session robes, and behind them the recorders, the clerks, the marshals of protocol, until the chamber of the long table held more power in one room than the Dominion had gathered in a generation. Resolution 4471 lay on the table in a case of black glass, a declaration of open war upon the human frontier, 19 worlds, 240 million humans. The fleet assessments called it a 9-week campaign. The economic annex called it an acquisition. First Archon Vesic Tal rose to speak, and he was good at it. 40 years of patience distilled into a quarter hour of contempt. He spoke of the accord as a document signed with a species too weak to insult properly. He spoke of human shipyards gone quiet, human fleets that had never exceeded 3% of the Dominion's tonnage, human colonies that answered every provocation of the last 4 decades with protests filed in triplicate. And at the end he turned deliberately, theatrically, toward the North Plinth and gestured at the still gray figure that had watched over the chamber longer than most of the council had served in it. 40 years ago they left their dead standing on our doorstep, Vesic Tal said. Today we return the favor. The chamber gave him the low rolling drum of 400 palms on stone. The vote was called. The clerk of session read the roll in the flat liturgical cadence of Court Qirell. One name, one answer, tallies scratching into the record. Affirmation followed affirmation. Morrow stood at his station beside the North Plinth, where protocol had always placed the keeper of relics, and out of 40 years of habit he watched the statue instead of the vote. He was the only one watching it. He would say that later, to the tribunal, to the historians, to anyone who asked for the rest of his life. He was the only one looking. At 14 minutes past the third bell, as the clerk read the 371st affirmation into the record, relic 44 Theta blinked. Morrow did not cry out. He would be proud of that, privately, forever. The clerk read on. The tally scratched. And then the statue exhaled, a slow, dry, deliberate breath that carried 40 years of stillness out of it, and spoke one word into the chamber of the long table, in flawless court Qirell, quietly, with the mild regret of a man correcting a clerical error. Objection. The clerk stopped reading. 406 heads turned. On the black granite plinth, the dead human soldier opened its eyes and looked, unhurried, from banner to banner, archon to archon, as though confirming that everyone it needed was present. No one in the chamber understood yet what the word meant. That was all right. It had waited 40 years. It could wait another minute. 43 years earlier, in the black between beacons at Tarsus Reach, Dominion raiders had taken a human convoy apart. 11 ships. 2,306 people. The Dominion's diplomats called it piracy and executed 4 scapegoats on a public feed, and the human negotiators sat through the footage without expression and signed the cessation accord of Tarsus Reach 2 years later. The Dominion's first archon of that era signed it with a flourish he did not bother to disguise, the flourish of a party signing a document it intended to outlive. The human delegation noticed the flourish. They noted it, in fact, in an internal memorandum, dated and filed, which read in its entirety, "They signed it the way you sign a receipt." That memorandum went to a woman named Imogen Hale. Director Hale ran the Office of Distant Provisions, a budget line that 11 consecutive auditors general mistook for agricultural insurance. It employed 41 people. It occupied the 3rd floor of a grain exchange annex in a city no Dominion analyst had ever flagged. And in the spring after the accord was signed, Director Hale issued Provision Order 12, classified at a level that had to be invented for it, a document of 106 pages whose operative sentence was 9 words long. Where a treaty cannot be trusted, it must be witnessed. The witness program took 15 years to build and gave no parades. Its instrument was the custodian, a volunteer, legally sworn, medically remade. A custodian's body was flooded with a stasis lattice that slowed its chemistry until a heart beat once every 41 minutes, and skin read to any instrument as mineral ceramic. A custodian's mind was throttled to 1/800th of waking speed, not asleep, never asleep, but adrift in a slow river of time where a year passed like a long afternoon, and 40 years arrived as 18 days and some hours. The sensorium stayed fully open. Everything the custodian saw and heard was written to crystal storage layered through the armor's bones, and each custodian was, before anything else, an officer of the Accord itself, a treaty advocate with recording authority under Article 9, empowered to witness, to preserve, and upon one narrow, formally defined trigger, to object. 2,214 custodians were seated across foreign space over 15 years. 61 were sold at salvage auctions by brokers who did not know what they were selling. 312 were left aboard stage derelicts along mapped salvage lanes. Others were gifted as diplomatic curiosities, traded as war trophies, donated to museums, because museums, Hale's planners noted, are climate-controlled, centrally located, and never throw anything away. The unit cost of a custodian, fully trained and emplaced, was less than 1% of the cost of a frigate. Hale kept that figure taped inside a desk drawer for 30 years. Anselm Roke was 34 when he volunteered, and he was not a soldier. He was a treaty lawyer, the kind who read hostile signatures the way physicians read scans, and he had watched the archival footage of the Tarsus Accord signing 11 times before he applied. He told the selection board a single sentence that went into his file, and much later, into the histories. They signed it like a receipt. Somebody should be there when they try to return the merchandise. The board noted that he was calm, that he was precise, and that in 8 days of evaluation, he never once raised his voice. He was accepted, remade, and assigned as Witness Custodian 1181. His emplacement was the frigate Palisade. Decommissioned, gutted by design, its drift computed by Hale's astrogators so that Dominion salvage sweeps would find it within 20 months. They found it in 17. Roke stood at parade rest on the ruined bridge and listened, at 1/800th speed, to the salvage master's boarding party argue about the auction price of his body. It came to him slowed and deep, like whale song. He found it funny. He had 18 days of subjective time ahead of him. He had decided early to keep his sense of humor. While Roke stood on his plinth, the rest of Provision Order 12 grew quietly around the Dominion like ivy. Humanity's declared fleet strength held steady at 3% of Dominion tonnage for 4 decades, because the declarations counted only what flew in the open. In the cometary halo of the Dominion's own home system, in a volume its survey office had charted, assessed, and dismissed in a single line, debris field K141, no value. The Provision fleet was assembled hull by hull over 26 years, cold-running, silent, until 318 ships hung in the dark with their reactors banked to a whisper. Human shipyards were formally decommissioned in the trade registries and reopened the same season as agricultural stations. The Dominion's economic desk logged the change and moved on, because it confirmed what the Dominion already believed, and nothing is easier to hide than a thing your enemy is certain of. And then there was the salvage. In the decade after the Accord, human comcores, relay spines, and targeting processors flooded the frontier salvage markets at prices no Qirell procurement officer could refuse. The Dominion's military expansion was built in those years, and thrift was doctrine. By the time the buildup finished, 61% of the Dominion's military relay lattice ran on salvaged human cores, and its gunnery networks carried human-fabricated targeting processors in 11,000 mounts. Every one of those components worked flawlessly. Every one of them also answered, beneath all its Qirell firmware, to an older signature, a set of governor keys held by 41 people in a grain exchange annex. A junior analyst in Hale's office once asked whether the Dominion would ever wonder why the salvage was so cheap. Hale's reply is preserved in the office's declassified minutes. Arrogance does its own quality assurance. Roke, meanwhile, learned the Dominion from the inside of a museum. In slow time, he watched the chamber of the long table conduct 1,106 formal sessions. He learned Court Qirell from the clerks, learned the 10 Archons voting blocks, learned which subcommittees met after hours when the recorders were dismissed, because those meetings were held in front of him, a dead thing, a trophy, the safest room in the Dominion. He witnessed session 3882, in which the 3rd Archon's war planning group scheduled the secret recommissioning of 7 shipyards, 11 years before Resolution 4471 was drafted. He witnessed the appropriations. He witnessed the map. All of it wrote itself to crystal in the bones of his armor. Time-stamped, sealed, admissible. His trigger was narrow, and Hale had drawn it herself. In the language of Article 9, Clause 4, a custodian may act only upon a formal, recorded vote to make war upon the signatory. Not rhetoric, not planning, not provocation. The vote itself entered into an official record, the one act even the Dominion's lawyers could never argue away. For 40 years, 1 month, and 9 days, the Dominion did not take that vote. Then, on the morning of the 371st affirmation, it did. The chamber marshal recovered first. He was a career officer with a ceremonial carbine that was not ceremonial at all, and he brought it up in one clean motion, and the weapon read its own targeting solution, recognized what it was pointed at, and powered down in his hands with a soft descending tone. The marshal worked the activation stud 3 times. The carbine declined 3 times. Nobody else moved. On the plinth, the statue rolled its shoulders, a small, economical motion, and a fine dust of ceramic sealant sifted off the armor like snow shaken from a roof. Joints that had not articulated in 4 decades unsealed one by one, each with a quiet crack that carried to the back row of the chamber. The human stepped down from the black granite. He set the helmet on the plinth behind him, carefully, the way a man sets down something he has finished carrying, and stood at the head of the long table where petitioners had stood for 300 years. "My name is Anselm Roke," he said. His voice was low and even and slightly rough, the voice of a man who had not used it in 40 years and had planned for that too. Warden Advocate of the Office of Distant Provisions, Witness Custodian 1181 of 2214. Under Article 9, Clause 4 of the Cessation Accord of Tarsus Reach, I am required to inform this body that the present session has been recorded in full. He paused and looked slowly down the table, and the pause was worse than the sentence. As have the preceding 1105. Somewhere in the upper tiers a counselor sat down without meaning to. First Archon Vesic Tal had not moved. His hands were flat on the black glass case of Resolution 4471, and he had the expression of a man rapidly recalculating everything he had said in this room in his entire career. On the 4th of Threnmarch, Session 3882, Roke said, in the tone of a clerk reading a docket. The Third Archon's working group voted in this chamber to recommission 7 shipyards prescribed under Accord Annex 2. I was present. On the 19th of that same session year, the appropriations were passed under agricultural headings. I was present. 11 years of preparatory sessions for the resolution currently on this table were conducted in this room after the recorders were dismissed, because this room was believed to contain nothing but furniture and a corpse. He inclined his head, very slightly, a courtesy. You held every secret meeting of your war in front of your only witness. I want the record to reflect that I appreciated the convenience. Vesic Tal found his voice. It was a good voice, and it had ended careers, and he used it now the way one uses a weapon of last resort. This chamber recognizes no authority. The chamber's recognition is not required, Roke said, without heat. Only its attendance. The accord you signed specifies its own enforcement. I am not here to argue it. I am here to execute it. Please sit down. 406 members of the Grand Council of the Qirell Dominion looked at the first Archon. Then, in a long, ragged rustle of slate-colored robes, they sat. What happened next happened in order, because it had been in order for 26 years. At the first mark, the crystal archive in Roke's armor burst transmitted through the Dominion's own relay lattice, 61% of which recognized the older signature beneath its firmware and passed the traffic with priority, routing the Dominion reserved for Archon-level decrees. 40 years of sealed recordings, indexed and time-stamped, arrived simultaneously at the chanceries of 9 neutral powers, the councils of 14 Dominion client species, and, because Hale's planners believed in thoroughness, the Dominion's own public information net, unencrypted, on the education channels, between a children's program and the shipping forecast. At the second mark, the breach clauses of the Accord executed against the treaty's surety. The Dominion's strategic antimatter reserve, bonded collateral, banked for 40 years with the neutral ledger worlds as the price of human signature, was frozen pending adjudication. Confirmation returned to the Chamber's own financial annex in 94 seconds. 3 counselors from the Treasury benches read their screens, and one of them made a sound that the session record preserved and no one ever asked to have stricken. At the third mark, the governor keys turned. In 7 military shipyards across 4 systems, the 7 from Session 3882, the salvaged human cores in every fabrication spine received a single instruction and complied with it. The yards did not explode. Nothing exploded. Anywhere, at any point. Hale's planners regarded explosions as an admission of poor scheduling. The yards simply stopped, gantry by gantry, and locked, and reported themselves locked to the Dominion's Naval Command, whose war room displays updated in real time in the Chamber's strategy annex next door, where a staff colonel watched 40 years of buildup go dark in the order it had been built. And at the fourth mark, debris field K-141 switched on. 318 ships lit their drives in the cometary halo of the Dominion's home system and fell inward in formation, cold hulls warming, transponders broadcasting a single identifier in Court Qirell, Provision Fleet, Accord Enforcement. They fired nothing. They jammed nothing. They simply arrived, over the shipyards, over the fleet anchorages, at the Lagrange points that 40 years of Dominion doctrine designated as decisive, and held station with the terrible politeness of a bailiff standing in a doorway. In orbit, the Home Defense Squadron went to battle stations, and High Marshal Denvek Ors gave the order to fire, and 11,000 gunnery mounts consulted the human-fabricated targeting processors the Dominion had bought at auction for thrift, and every gunnery screen in the fleet returned the same status flag, in the same pale letters, in the Dominion's own script, objection. In the chamber of the long table, Roke had not raised his voice, and did not raise it now. He watched the Archons the way he had watched them for 40 years, cataloging faces. The second Archon, who was staring at the banners as if they had betrayed her personally. The fifth, whose hands were folded and whose eyes were closed, already composing his testimony. The ninth, youngest, who alone was watching Roke rather than the displays, with an expression Roke recognized from the far side of the accord table 43 years of history ago, the look of someone learning, in real time, what a signature means. Sort of Essektal rose one last time. You cannot hold a sovereign people hostage to a clause. No one is being held, Roke said. Your worlds remain yours. Your government remains yours. Your fleet remains yours. Anchored. Your yards remain yours. Closed. Your war does not remain yours. That is the entire text of my instruction, First Archon. We did not come to take your worlds. He looked down the long table, from the black glass case to the far doors, and the session record preserves 4 seconds of silence before the last line. We came to take your war. The clerk of session, who had been holding the roll of Resolution 4471 in both hands throughout, looked at the First Archon, looked at the human, and, because a clerk's whole soul is procedure, asked in a small, steady voice whether the vote should be entered as carried. Enter it as carried, Roke said, then enter the objection, and enter that the objection was sustained. The motion fails. From the blink to the last shipyard going dark, the enforcement of the cessation accord of Tarsus Reach took 12 minutes and 9 seconds. No shot was fired. No one died. The Dominion's histories, which are not kind to that morning, concede both numbers exactly. High Marshal Denvek Ors stood on the flag bridge of the Talon of Thren and did what staff officers are trained to do when the present becomes unusable. He worked the problem backward. The targeting processors had been purchased 38 years ago. He knew, because his own academy thesis, commended, circulated, quoted in procurement doctrine, had cited the human salvage acquisitions as a triumph of Qirell thrift. The relay lattice had been standardized on human cores 4 years after that. He had served on the certification board. Debris field K-141 had been surveyed and dismissed before he held his first command. The survey officer's single-line assessment had never been revisited, because nothing about it had ever changed, and he understood now that nothing about it had ever been permitted to change. He stood very still on his flag bridge, surrounded by weapons that would not fire and screens that all said the same word, and assembled the timeline the way a man assembles the evidence of his own house's foundation being poured by someone else. The stage derelict, 40 years. The salvage flood, 41. The provision order, if the broadcast documents were genuine, and he already knew in the cold professional floor of himself that they were genuine, 43. How long had they been planning this? He was 52 years old. The answer was, since before he could read. The humans had not outfought the Dominion. They had outweighted it, outfiled it, outsigned it. He gave the order to stand down before the council's instruction arrived, and when his flag captain asked him quietly what they were supposed to do now, Ors looked at the pale word on the gunnery screens for a long moment and said the sentence that would follow him into every history of the war that never happened. We were the exhibit. We just never blinked. In the weeks afterward, the tribunals recovered and translated thousands of personal records from that morning. One of them, entered into the public archive over the objection of no one, because by then the Dominion had run out of objections, was the private session log of novice archivist Sefwin Odru, 3rd tier, age 26, assigned to the North Plinth as Maros Jr. It is preserved exactly as written, stylus skips and all. My hands are still shaking, so I will write it plainly and slowly. I was 4 paces from it when it blinked. I have dusted its hands 111 times. That is not a guess. We logged the maintenance. I counted the entries this evening, because I could not stop myself. 111 times, and I used to apologize to it when I bumped the plinth with the cart, out loud. Every archivist does something like this eventually. You spend enough years with an object and you talk to it, and it is fine, because the object is an object. I keep looking at the clock above the north door. I do not know why. I think some part of me believes that if I watch the clock, time will behave. It heard me. 40 years, it heard all of us. The docents, the school children, the archons, me, and my apologies. Tonight, the senior staff are drafting statements about institutional review and provenance procedures, and I am sitting in the cold gallery writing this, and I keep arriving at the same small thought and it will not leave. We put a witness on a pedestal, under our best lights, and dusted him, and fed him every secret we had, and the whole time we thought we were the ones studying him. At Shipyard Vell, where the fabrication spines locked at the third mark, the Dominion employed 60,000 indentured Luthi. There was no riot. That should be recorded, because the Dominion's contingency plans assumed one, and the plans were found afterward, filed and thorough. When the spines locked and the yard went quiet, genuinely quiet, a place that had not been silent in 30 years, the Luthi work crews set their tools down in rows, the way their custom sets down anything that will be needed again, and walked out to the perimeter fence and stood looking up. The broadcast reached the yard's public address in the second hour, the enforcement provisions, read in court Qirell and then in trade tongue, including the clause voiding all labor contracts executed under the war appropriations. Forewoman Esu of Gantry 9, who had signed her indenture at 14 and had 11 years remaining on it, took the contract chit from around her neck, and those beside her at the fence said afterward that she did not throw it, did not break it, did nothing anyone could be charged for. She folded her hand around it once and put it in her pocket, and kept looking at the sky, where a human ship the size of a district hung silent over the yard that no longer owned her. 60,000 Luthi stood at that fence until dark. Witnesses could not agree afterward whether anyone had spoken at all. And on the state channel, the voice of the Dominion, the evening anchor Pelavar Dusk read the council's compliance statement at the sixth bell. He was famous for his composure. He had read war budgets and famine reports and the deaths of 2 archons in the same unrocked baritone for 19 years. That evening, viewers across 4 systems watched him read 11 sentences of surrender drafted by committee, and what they remembered was not the text but the pauses, the way he stopped between sentences, as though each new line were being handed to him from somewhere off-camera, at some cost. He read that the Dominion reaffirmed its commitments under the cessation accord. Pause. That Resolution 4471 had failed of passage. Pause. That the Grand Council welcomed the resumption of verified peace. On the final sentence, Pelavar Dusk did something he had never done in 19 years of broadcasts. He looked up from the text, directly into the lens, for a little under 2 seconds, and said nothing at all. The clip was replayed for years. Half the Dominion insisted his face showed humiliation. The other half insisted, more quietly, that it showed relief. He retired that winter and never settled the question, except once, at a private dinner, where he is reported to have said that he had spent his whole career reading the Dominion's words aloud, and that night was the first time he was certain someone had been listening. 3 years passed, the way years do after history stops holding its breath. The Chamber of the Long Table is a school now. The Grand Council petitioned to keep it, and the Arbitration Commission, 9 neutral powers, 14 client species, and 2 very patient human advocates, ruled instead that the room where the war was voted and unvoted would be given to the study of the law that stopped it. They call it the Tarsus School of Accord Law. Students from 16 species argue precedent at the long table where the archons sat, and the arguing is loud and procedural and frequently ridiculous, and everyone involved understands that the loudness is the point. Rooms like that one should never be quiet again. The black granite plinth is still there, at the north end, beneath the banners. The banners were another petition, and another loss for the council, so they hang where they hung, as evidence. The plinth holds nothing now except a small brass plate, kept polished by the school's junior archivist, a Qirell named Sefwin Odru, who requested the posting and got it. The plate reads, in Court Qirell and in the human trade alphabet, 5 words. He was never a statue. Imogen Hale did not live to see the vote. She had died 4 years before it, at her desk on the 3rd floor of the Grain Exchange Annex, and her successor found the unit cost figure still taped inside the drawer, and beneath it, in Hale's own hand, a second slip of paper that said, if you are reading this, keep them boring. The Office of Distant Provisions remains a budget line that auditors mistake for agricultural insurance. Its current staff is 41 people, 2,213 custodians are still in place, and every foreign power now knows they exist, and knows roughly none of the places they stand, and the treaties of the last 3 years have been drafted, every signatory admits, with unusual care. The joint shipyard at Vell, Qirell hulls, Luthi crews, human governors on every spine, a wage ledger audited by all three, is converting the Dominion's war tonnage into grain haulers. It is 11 months behind schedule. Its oversight committee argues in 3 languages, files grievances against itself, and has twice shut down over the placement of a canteen. Forewoman Esu of Gantry 9, who runs the retrofit line and owns her own name outright, was asked by a human journalist whether the yard would ever make its quota, and answered that a slow ship full of grain arrives, and a fast ship full of soldiers only ever leaves, and the journalist could print that if he needed something to print. Anselm Roke declined every honor except one. He declined the rank they offered and the seat on the arbitration commission and, in a letter of 2 sentences that the school keeps under glass, the statue. The Council of the Restored Dominion, in a gesture their own historians describe as either penance or genius, had voted to commission a likeness of him for the North Plinth. He wrote back that the plinth was occupied by a brass plate that said everything he knew, and that in his experience 1 statue was enough for any room. The honor he accepted was a teaching post, 1 seminar a year at the long table on the law of witness. He is a middling lecturer by the school's own evaluations. He speaks too quietly, and he pauses too long. An enrollment for his seminar fills in under a minute every year. His body is 4 years older than it was when he stepped aboard the Palisade. The lattice keeps its own books. Subjectively, he served 18 days, and he has never once put it that way, because he watched 40 years happen at the speed rivers move, and he does not consider himself excused from any of them. On the evening after each year's seminar, the school's caretakers know to leave the chamber unlocked. Roke comes in alone when the light through the west windows has gone the color of old brass, and stands a while at the north end, by the plinth, out of what he would call habit and no one else would. The first year, Odrew watched from the gallery and saw him settle, just for a moment, into parade rest. Heels together, helmet arm curled around nothing, and then catch himself and let his shoulders down, and simply stand there like a man, in a room full of empty chairs that once held an empire, listening to a silence he no longer had to keep. 40 years is a long time to hold still. It is no time at all to keep a promise. The story is complete.